Hi everybody, I'm Marcia McCarrow
Hello there, I'm Carol Cooper.
and we're here again with Chris Sweeney doing a part 2 interview this time round. Hello Chris.
Good morning to you both.
Hi Chris.
Hi.
Chris, I wanted to follow up on the interview that we did with you a few weeks back now, and there were lots of things that we were discussing on that day. But there were quite a few things that we missed out on talking to you about because of the time element. And so one of those areas was around looking at change. And in this climate where we're going through what we're going through, April 2020, we're in the middle of lockdown, I thought it'd be quite a good thing to have a conversation with you, pulling on your experience around working with organisations and taking organisations through change, to see what your thoughts were on that topic. And I'm starting off with a quote this time round. And it's a quote from Socrates, and so you've probably heard it. The secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And so, what are your thoughts on that? Does that make sense to you? Or is that too a simplistic way of viewing change?
It rings a lot of bells with me, but I'm aware that it doesn't do that for everybody. And I was just going to start. I will come to that in about 15 seconds. The world has changed since we spoke last. I looked at the date. It was the middle of March. We had no idea where we were going to be then. Not a clue. Now, while you never quite know what life's going to be like in 6 weeks' time, I don't think we had the first notion of the amount of change to which we are going to be, or we have been and continue to be subjected. So back to your quote, it rings a lot of bells with me because I believe I'm the sort of person who can look to the future, look at possibilities. And I rather hope I can come back and explain more of that later. I'm very aware from experience in my working life that that's not necessarily the case for everybody. I used to work with someone very closely, not you, Carol, it's all right, who found change phenomenally difficult. But I would suggest to you that that was because of her personality, her style, the personality traits that she had. She found change incredibly difficult. And I remember the exchange one day when I suddenly realized that it was all fine for me because I was in charge of the change and she was the recipient of a change that I was attempting to implement, and I'd got it badly wrong. It was being done to her, and that terrified her because all the certainties that she had were suddenly being chipped away by this young whippersnapper of a manager. It was a long time ago, you can imagine. And I learned quite a lot in that moment, that actually it was fine for me because A, I might be the sort of person that can embrace change, and B, I happen to be in the position, and I think it's reasonable to use the word power. Actually, I was in the position of power, which meant I could actually do the change. I was implementing it. Now, whether I was managing it, I certainly wasn't managing it very well on that occasion. But I suppose the point I want to make is that some of us will find change easier than others. Yes. Some people just find change really hard work.
So do you think we sort of manage change, lead change, facilitate change, or do we move through those areas, or are there some that I've missed? I love those looks.
Priceless.
What do you want to talk about now? I'm going to say that I think it's about facilitation, but does that say more about me than about the process? I don't know that, because I would rather... Sorry?
Good point.
Yeah, I would rather facilitate, because I think that one way to achieve change, and when we spoke last time, I said that the only point in doing any job I've ever done was to achieve change. I think I warmed to the notion of facilitating change, because then, for me, that word means that the other person, other people, the organization with whom I'm working is engaged in the process. That change is not being done to them, but they are engaged in the process of changing, and I am enabling them to do that. Now, maybe that's more to do with me and my style, because I actually think that works. And if I think back, and I really am thinking out loud now, that would be good social work practice. That in the end, and that's for those who didn't see volume 1, that's what I was doing in the end of the 70s and the early 80s. The only way that you could work with a family, say, and get them to make permanent change would be to get them to do it. If it's done to them, they're likely to resist, surely. I mean, all of us would. I mean, if someone tells me to do something, I'm not likely to greet that warmly. If I can enable those people to change and learn through a process, then I think we have progress. And if I go to my last job, when I was working with Parkinson's, and my role was to convince health service commissioners of the validity of my argument, the key thing to do there was to work out what was in it for them, not in a selfish sense, but if I could enable them to change, and in so doing get some of their boxes ticked by, say, the Department of Health. You know, if I could get them to do something and then the Department of Health came along and went, that was good, wasn't it? That type of facilitation is where I'm at. I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
I like that word, enable. So that's almost like adding another word into that list, really. So manage, lead, facilitate, enable change. I like that. Managing for me is more about the resources, isn't it, than actually the process of it.
Yes, I like that definition. They're not exclusive, these terms, clearly. And I guess in the roles I've had, I've probably had to do each of those things you've said: manage, facilitate, enable. There's one other, I forget what you said.
Lead. Yeah.
But I suppose what I'm thinking is that I perhaps tend towards the facilitation and enabling bit, but of course there is a management element, because if the resources aren't there, then it isn't going to happen.
Yeah.
My energy would have been on the interpersonal stuff to enable someone to see that there was a possibility of a future, and that change was worth doing.
Yeah.
I think that's
fantastic. CC, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just come in on keeping on that part of the conversation. When you did say that, we're creators, not necessarily leaders, is that you're obviously demonstrating in your conversation about enjoying supporting change and creating it. Would you say that is more you then, the creative side of moving through change, and not necessarily, writing the rule, just supporting that creative side of change?
I think it is very much me, but you particularly will remember that I was once challenged and told that I was not a good civil servant.
Yes, I do.
And indeed asked to return to a substantive post that I had. And part of that was because I was eager to see change, but was working within a setting that wasn't actually amenable to change, but for a number of good reasons. I mean, I have the highest respect for the functions of civil service and its impartiality. My problem with it was I wanted to say, why don't you do this? Well, because the civil service, and particularly at its lower levels, isn't really interested in that type of creativity. What it's really interested in is doing what the minister wants it to do.
Yeah.
And again, I did not slot in. I said last time we spoke that I suspect I didn't work well in what I perceive to be constraining environments. Lots of people have worked in those environments for donkey's years. I found I wanted to pursue change, sometimes in environments that wasn't happy to allow that, really.
Yeah, yeah, and I do remember that time in your life, and really is hard though because you're working against a book that the government have written, the rules, and they don't like that sort of suggestion that it could be done another way. You're right, the minister wrote the rules, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, that's
So,
fine.
yeah, hard. I found that hard, so I understood it very, very much. Um, Enjoying this creation of change as opposed to following the model. How does that fit in? Talking about the model with the patchwork quilt model you spoke about last time. How does that go?
I think once upon a time, and by that I probably mean a generation before me, so for many people 2 or 3 generations, I think it is largely only a 20th century construct. I don't think people were like this in the 19th or before, but throughout the 20th century we ended up with jobs being jobs for life very often. Certainly my father would have had his career not come to an end courtesy of a rather earlier death, he would have stayed with one company for his entire life. And I guess that was pretty much a lot of people's experience. If not one company, certainly one very direct stream. Not the same job, but pursuing job after job after job in one direction. Yeah. And I remember so clearly on a management course at the King's Fund in London, a chief executive introduced us to the notion that that was no longer the way that jobs would work. It's a concept that also is backed up a lot by a guy called Charles Handy. Charles Handy is a fascinating management thinker, dead easy to read. In one sense, I think he's only ever written one book. He's actually written about 10, but they are all saying roughly the same thing now. And it ties in with this notion of the patchwork. If you imagine a hexagonal patchwork quilt, the patches do not go in a straight line. They can go, well, by definition, I should have drawn this really, shouldn't I? They go slightly to an angle. And then the next one along, again, is at an angle. It might jerk that way, or it might go that way again. And if you look at my career, and I believe a lot of other people's now, I train to be a priest. I don't become one, but I become a social worker. There are clearly skills which, not in a straight line, but slightly to one side there, transferable skills from one to the other. I moved from there to work for Scope. I took with me a whole load of those social work skills into my work with Scope, not in a dead straight line, but very much attached. From Scope, I went to the Community Health Council. By that stage, I'd accumulated all manner of things in the previous 3 patches, if you like, and they align. There isn't really a gap. Those skills, that experience, all play into that next one. And if you look at my entire life's work, paid work, and picture it a bit like a quilt with hexagonal chunks, that I found a very helpful notion. And I found it very helpful when talking to other people about their careers, because we tend, I suspect, still to see a linear function in terms of where we're going. And I don't think life is necessarily like that in the 21st century, the latter part of the 20th. And it's definitely not like that for some people. Some people, I suspect, still do forge a very direct line. One of the things I was thinking about before I came on, if I might just digress, one of the things that I found very, very helpful is the thinking of a management consultant, and I actually printed it off. You can tell I was actually thinking hard. A chap called Edgar Schein, S-C-H-E-I-N, German spelling of Schein. And he had a book, or he developed a concept called career anchors. And it really spoke volumes to me years ago, particularly when I started doing my research for my master's in leading innovation and change. What I looked at there was motivation. What makes people tick? Yeah. What gets you up in the morning? Why on earth do you get up and go to work? And if I might, I'll just whip through Shine's.
Please, yeah.
Please do, yeah.
By career anchors, he means things that do get you up in the morning. Why, that give you the buzz. And he detected, I think we started off with 6. It's extended a little over the years. Types of people. And there are those, he suggests, who are massively competent at a very, very small area of knowledge. Imagine the scientist, the chap, the woman who researches into the most phenomenal depths, but really only knows about that. Really useful people to have around, particularly at a time like this, where we need scientists who can research COVID-19 to the nth degree. Really good. There are those people who get up in the morning because they want to be generally competent in a management setting. They don't want to know that much. What they do is know that much about the screen won't handle it.
Yeah.
In some ways, I was very much like that in the NHS. I knew a little bit about so much, but I really didn't know anything in depth. But I always did know someone who did.
Yes.
Like that from the AA. That was me. Some people get up and go to work because they actually want stability. They want security. They need to know that they've got a job for life if possible. Some people are entrepreneurs. Some people want to think outside the box and want to take command of themselves. That almost opposite to those who will just go to work because they want that security. Some people, and I found this when I did my research, it was very, very funny. I was researching what made people tick, but I was doing it on people that I knew. Well, of course, like most of us, the people we know and work with are a bit like us, really. And I was finding all the same answers, what made people get up and go to work. And I thought, I'll just try someone totally different. And I went to my brother-in-law, been a director in a textile firm for all his life. And I suddenly found a person who got up and went to work just because of the challenge, because there was always something new to do. Well, this was unheard. It's not me. It's not anyone I knew. Totally different motivation. That and then there's a final one that Shine identifies, and that is service or dedication to a cause. And I've managed to unearth in my research half a dozen people who said, because it's worth doing, because it's, and of course that was where I fitted in, because that's what I was doing. I got up in the morning, as I said last time we spoke, hopefully to try and facilitate change and make something better. But what I had to learn is that that's not where everybody's at. And out of those people I've just identified, I think, going back to your theme, Marcia, some of those will find change much harder than others. The entrepreneurial types, the types who want autonomy, will find it quite fun, provided they're in a position to do something about it. They'll hate it if someone imposes it. Yeah. A person who is dedicated to the narrowest possible field of work probably will find change really tough, because you're asking them to break outside something that they're comfortable with. The person who's the pure challenger, like Edmund Hillary, because Everest was there, that's why we climbed it. If they're in charge of the change, they'll revel in it because it's yet another challenge. And I suspect every afternoon at the moment at 4 p.m., 5 p.m., we see people a bit like that doing government press conferences. They're the ones who've just faced with a challenge and are saying, let's do this, let's do that, let's tackle it this way, tackle it that way. My point, I think different people will face change in different ways. Some will find it more comfortable than others. Some will relish the challenge. They'll love doing it. Therefore, I suspect we have to be subtle in the way we approach the management, the leadership, the facilitation of change, to understand the people we're doing it with, to try and work out how they're likely to react. Blanket imposition of change, bad news, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I was just going to say to you, Chris, as well, listening to all of that, it just sounds like the stitching that, sews the quilt together. And I think this is what you've been doing over the years, and I've watched you do over the years, of course. And I was going to really ask you quickly, just on the MA again, was your MA around putting this, stitching into place, if you like? Was it something you just wanted to go back and do and look back on your life to see what changes and what differences you had made? I just want to know what drove you to go and do that MA.
I think at the time I was going through a period where, as I said, I was one of those people who knew a vast amount, no, not a lot, but about a vast number of things. I was that very shallow, the field was colossal. I wanted to work out whether or not I was capable of doing the other roles. I didn't know what those were at the time, but I thought, I actually felt, and I was wrong with hindsight, that I was quite shallow. The pool of knowledge I had was quite shallow, but it was very wide. What I began to learn was that there are other ways of doing things, perhaps those ones I've just elucidated there, all of which are valid. There are neither rights nor wrongs. All of those types of people have validity, and it gets them all up. I mean, one of the things I did do when I got on into working for myself, I used to use Belbin's team role analysis. I loved working on that. You work with a team and you begin to work with the team and help them understand that a team needs all of these different types of people in it. He didn't use those terms, he used a different set. What I began to learn is that I am the world's lousiest completer finisher. To finish a job it's why the world needs people like you, Carol. You see, any team needs people who actually take the daft ideas of the others and all the bright stuff and the zippy stuff, but actually bring it down, tie it up.
It's always in my in tray, I'll tell you. Still is.
Well, obviously the way I tell it. What I learned was that I loved working with people like me, but frankly, nothing happens.
Yeah.
Great time, really great fun. But actually, you've got to have those other people doing other roles. Otherwise, nothing much actually changes. And given that actually most of us most people like me, I think, probably want to see change happen, what you actually need is the people that can implement it around you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't do it all on my own because actually halfway through the job, and I think it's time to look at something else now because I'm bored. I want a new challenge. But
the memory of it, yeah.
All right. I'm not sure I answered your question there, but still.
Yeah, good stuff. Really good stuff. I was thinking about a previous interview that we did with Nikki Davis, and she comes up a lot in my mind, and she talked about one of the messages I took away from her interview was nothing is lost. And she was talking about what you've just explained about your experience and how don't consign your experience to the bin called spent. You take that with you each time and you use it. And I was saying sort of in my summary just very recently that I don't think I've been really that good at carrying my experience through. I've looked at it and thought, yes, I did that then, but how does that fit into what I need to be doing now? And so when you talk about that patchwork quilt, that really absolutely makes sense for me, that you take things along with you. And actually, although I probably don't think I did it well, I probably think I do it better than I think I do, if that makes sense. No, listening to both Nikki and yourself in terms of the explanations. I wanted to go back to your initial example that you gave of somebody that was struggling with the change that was taking place. And to get you to talk about reluctance and resistance, why do you think, what makes us reluctant or even resistant to getting involved in change? Is it all about fear, or does it go deeper than that?
I think there is fear. you suddenly find your boat being rocked quite violently. And I think there is genuine fear that all your certainties are no longer certain, of course. The NHS is a classic environment for this. I mean, you two know as well as I do, the NHS has been reorganised time without number over the last 30 years. And on each occasion, responsibilities change, accountabilities change, without consultation in the most part, because it's an imposition from above. And people just fall by the wayside because all the certainties they did have are suddenly threatened. However, I think there's something else going on, and again, something I alluded to in my first talk with you. After I finished in the NHS, I think I said before, I went off and trained to become a psychometric practitioner. I had become fascinated by psychometrics, of which there are scores. I mean, they're just scores and scores. Two I got involved with in some depth. Myers-Briggs type indicators, the good old MBTI. I actually love it. I think it really, really, well, it helped me to understand a lot about who I was. The other one, the one I was actually licensed to practice, was Cattell's 16PF, 16 personality factors. They're very, very different tools, but they often tell a similar story, coming at it from a different route. And if you've not bumped into Myers-Briggs, it's based on Jungian psychology. That may close the door for some of you. You may say that's a load of bunkum. I would certainly give it a shout. Go and have a look online if you know nothing, because it suggests there that that some choices we make are made very, very early in our lives, like at toddler time, and that we develop personality styles very early on. Now, taking from that, going back to what you're saying there, Marcia, some people just will embrace change much more easily than others. For some people, that's a much tougher ask. It really is, because everything of the way they think and behave is actually not likely to open the door to change. Some personality types are likely to be embracing that change. The 16PF stuff, the second one I mentioned, likewise will say some people are very good at change, some people are less likely to be so. So I think it's too simple just to say people do X, people do Y. We are all different, and we come in very different packages. Some of us will do some things more easily than others, more intuitively. That is not to say that we can't operate literally on the other side, outside our natural box. Of course we can. But the classic Myers-Briggs one, and if you've ever, I'm sure you've probably done this, the person beginning a Myers-Briggs session will say, write your name, pick up a pen, write your name. Now pick up the pen with your other hand and write your name. You can do it, but boy, is it hard work. And the product is frankly awful. If you practice long enough, you could do it. And that is something I've learned, again, that it's very easy sometimes just to slot into the box that we're comfortable in. You can get people to embrace change, even if it's not their natural style, but it takes a lot more work and it's tough on them. So you've got to work with them. And that's perhaps where I come back to this enabling business.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I can see how it all slots together. And we see this, don't we, mapping out on social media. Those people that are embracing the change, those people that are looking for the opportunities and creating, as you talked about earlier, those people that are looking and saying, God, this is a challenge, you know, where's it going to take me to next? We're seeing all of this that you talked about playing out in front of us on our screens. So those people that are really struggling with it at the moment.
And some literally resisting and saying, you know,
yes.
how dare they do this to us?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think they're scared.
Yeah, and that's about the fear angle.
Yep.
And so I do apologise for this next question, but what advice would
Go
you
for it, Marcia.
give people? I like the way I apologise first, but then ask it anyway.
Yeah.
Would you give people that you think are struggling with it at the moment, based on what you know about enabling change?
To people who are leading change, I would say be sensitive to the people that you're working with and try and understand that they won't find it easy. To those who are having change done to them, I think that's a tougher question because they're not in a position sometimes of any power at all to influence the process. Maybe to acknowledge, this is always the tough one, to try and like yourself enough to understand that you may be finding this one difficult and understand why you're finding it difficult. And that's quite a tough one, to have the insight that you know you're not an easy, that you don't find change easy, and try and work out the way forward in that. If the leaders are empathic and can understand that you're going to find it tough, it's going to be easier for the others to accept change and to develop themselves into it. But I think it is a tough one for those who are having change done to them and are temperamentally quite scared of it. It really is a tough one.
Yeah, it is. And for anybody, whatever you can do to get yourself through this time at the moment, that's what you've got to focus on, isn't it? It's just getting yourself, that's all you can do to work from hour to hour, from day to day, just making sure that your mental well-being is as good as it can be. Then that's what your focus needs to be. And I had that conversation with somebody recently online, just saying that if somebody, wants to go and feels the need to eat rice pudding for a week, because that's going to help them, go eat rice pudding for the week and then start again at the end of that week. Don't be beating yourself up again about this stuff. You've just got to take it at your own pace.
Got to be kind to yourself.
Absolutely.
And also, may I just add to that? I totally agree, but also not to always feel you've failed if you're not doing what other people want you to do and or expect of you, really. Because I'm so guilty of that. I always think, am I doing this right? Well, maybe not in somebody else's eyes, but as long as you follow, you're going along that route of change or diversity, whatever it is, if you're doing it with sensitivity, like you so well say, and I always tried that in my life, always tried to be sensible with people in new ventures, PPI that we're involved in, and various other subjects, all new stuff from the government. But yeah, it's really hard. It's hard. You've got to then put yourself in their place, or remember days gone by when you were in their place, but now you're the leader, you're doing it, and pulling that together the best way you can. And then I don't mean about being nicey, I just mean about being sensitive and letting other people see your human side.
Genuineness, isn't it? It's
genuineness. And I know, Chris, you've always had that. We've worked with each other for years, so I do understand that about you.
One of the things I appreciate, we haven't got a vast amount of time. One of the things I've just recently done, 20 odd years ago, when I was in a pretty dark place, my mentor at that stage said, write your life story. I started, I wrote it in the third person, showed it to her. She says, just change all of that and put it into the first person. It is much more powerful. I got as far as my late teenage years. And by that stage, I was changing and I was beginning to deal with life in a very different way, a much more positive way. Recently, I found it and I've gone back and I'm extending it. I'm going to write the rest of it. I doubt anyone else will ever read it. It is a fascinating process, but it shows me how I have dealt with change in various settings. Teenage years, school even, not necessarily a happy time. How did I deal with that? How did I deal with this business of going to college, training to be a priest, and then going, you know what? I don't think I can do that. It's not for me. What I realise, and it goes back to something you said, Marcia, and back to the patchwork. If I look at it, I watch those threads going through it, how I dealt with situations, what I took from one situation, how I used that in the next situation. If people have got time over the next, who knows how long we're in lockdown, if you've got time and a piece of paper or a computer, I highly recommend doing it. It's fascinating. It also unlocks loads of other things you may have forgotten, and that's a totally different set of benefits for me. Not necessarily just the good bits, some of the not so good bits, how have I dealt with those? Very interesting. A little digression.
I think, Chris Sweeney, you are a glutton for punishment, because I'm now thinking, you know where this is going, don't you? Oh, we need to know. There's a part,
maybe a series,
like part 10, just because that sounds really interesting, to put the academic in on that as well, and look at the experience. So how long do you think it's going to take you to finish writing that up?
Years, I should think, but it is fascinating to do, genuinely fascinating. Again, I've no idea if everybody would find it fascinating. Perhaps some wouldn't. Maybe it's only people with my type of personality that would find it interesting to go back. But I'm finding it absolutely riveting. It's not for anyone else to read. It really is. Yeah. It's about me, and it's
absolutely, it's that self.
So useful
exploration, isn't it? Chris, as always, absolutely fascinating to talk to you about this subject of managing change, or enabling change. I shall now start talking about it in those terms. We really appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you both very much indeed. It is a pleasure.
Thank you, Chris. And I didn't even get to ask you about being a roadie for a boy band.
Nope.
But I will.
We can save that for next time.